Everybody wants to move to Chicago, or at least wanted to. In case you haven't heard, Chicago really isn't that great anymore. In fact, according to recently released census data, more and more people are leaving Chicago. They're moving into the suburbs, into smaller towns, or likely leaving the state of Illinois completely. Because sadly, this once proud city is kind of crummy now. It's not the same place it was a decade ago, and far from the proud city it was a century ago. A lot of the people who live here defend Chicago just for the sake of defending Chicago. And if you have to try to convince people your city's great, then perhaps something's wrong. There's a lot of reasons why people are leaving Chicago, and there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't move there yourself. So the next time you think about moving somewhere else, skip this place, because Chicago's not what it was cracked up to be. Chicago, a city which went from a swampy, remote frontier town to a booming, bustling, explosive center of the Midwest. Innovation, ingenuity, determination, and sheer ruthlessness ruled the day. Immigrants flocked here for opportunity. It was a city to be admired. Now, a lot of the population's the exact opposite of that. Many residents expect handouts, and those who can't get their way politically will take it with force or coercion. Chicago's such a bad place to live now that the rest of the state doesn't want to live there. You ask people downstate what they think of Chicago, and they'll roll their eyes. I'd rather live in my podunk little struggling community 100 miles away, they'll say, than deal with the BS that comes with living in Chicago. So, hey Chicago, in case you didn't know, the rest of the state doesn't like you very much. Why? They're paying a lot of taxes because of you. Chicago only makes up 20% of the entire state's population, but the rest of the state is a lot less wealthy because of Chicago. There's a reason Illinois is the least tax-friendly state in the nation, as property taxes here are enough to keep homeowners far less comfortable than their Midwest neighbors. For a $400,000 home in Chicago, property taxes alone are close to $10,000, and they're always looking for reasons to raise more taxes. Luxury taxes, dining taxes, congestion taxes, ride-hailing taxes. At least they got rid of the soda tax. Sales taxes are also the highest in the nation too, a 10% rate for most retail purchases in the city. Chicagoans pay the city 1.25%, the county 1.75%, the transit authority 1%, and the state 6.25%. And expect that number to grow, people. Chicago alone is one reason Illinois is one of the fastest shrinking states. The state has struggled to keep residents since the 1970s, as more people are leaving than staying. And up until a couple years ago, Chicago proper was still growing, but now the nation's third largest city is shrinking too. Look at this map. Green is population increase. Pink is population decrease. As you can see, the shrinking part is growing. There's a Facebook page called Escaping Illinois with 46,000 followers, where people vent about many of the same things we're talking about right now. No wonder a lot of people in Chicago drink a lot. Win the lottery? Good luck being paid. You might get an IOU in the mail for that winning ticket. The state has a budget shortfall, in case you didn't know. It's all enough to drive out middle-class families who want safety and affordability out of Chicago into places like Omaha, Nebraska, or even Des Moines, Iowa. And lower-class residents are leaving for smaller nearby communities, taking their criminal and drug habits with them, which is another reason the rest of the state's mad at Chicago. They're inheriting your problems. It's the Chicago way. That's just the way it's always been in the Windy City. Corruption's pretty much in Chicago's DNA. Higher-ups think they're being creative at thwarting laws. Regular citizens say Chicago's leaders are breaking them. They call it Crook County for a reason, after all. Wikipedia has an entire entry about the corruption here. Studies have reported that Chicago and Crook County's judicial district have recorded more than 1,700 public corrupt convictions. And that's just since 1976. They didn't even compile corruption statistics before that. 6 Illinois governors have been convicted of crimes, and 4 actually served time in the last 50 years. Who needs term limits in Chicago? Just wait for them to leave office against their will. So Chicago is undoubtedly the most corrupt city in the nation, with corruption costs of about $500 million a year. It's not only politicians, it's church officials, police officers, contractors, lobbyists, unions, teachers, actors, and probably even Little League umpires. It's been said that a couple of politicians getting together in Chicago is now a crime scene.
Holy cow!
Uh-oh, Chicago, check this out. When they're comparing you to Detroit, Illinois residents, many of them Chicago residents, are more dependent on food stamps than any other neighboring state. And of our nation's 10 largest states, only Pennsylvania outranks Illinois just barely for SNAP benefits. 15% of Chicago residents get food and other government assistance. Now, a certain percent of the population should get some assistance, but in Chicago, it's becoming generational assistance, and it's draining the city's budget. That's just another reason that Chicago ranks next to last of all major cities when it comes to fiscal health. While handouts are all the rage here, and lower-class citizens continue to get payouts and assistance, retirement obligations and pensions are diminished, as are healthcare benefits. So the working class is paying for the lower class, and as a result, the city's broke, which means higher taxes, which means people are going to leave, which means a lower tax base, which means more budget shortfalls, and eventually lower home prices. The blue line is Chicago. Face it, Chicago's a mess financially. It has debts estimated at $34 billion. That's $37,000 for every taxpayer. This chart says it all, and you might want to pause the video to look at it closely, because we're moving on. Boy, it is crowded here, mister. Chicago's traffic is certainly no joke. It's actually now the second worst in the nation, where drivers wasted 145 hours in traffic last year. Only Boston had worse traffic. And apparently being stuck in traffic costs the average Chicago commuter more than $2,000 every year in lost time, likely on the Dan Ryan. Apparently part of the problem here has been the popularity of ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft, which have shifted the transportation patterns from subways and taxis to one-at-a-time rides. And half of all commutes within Chicago are less than 3 miles. Part of that's because of the crummy weather. According to the NOAA, Chicago has 189 total days of sun, which is close to every other day. But the problem is, a lot of the cloudy days are bunched into one long stretch from November to March. You hardly see the sun here from late fall into early spring. Winters here are long and brutal, at least most years, although the year that just passed was relatively tame. But remember the polar vortex from 2019 when it was minus 21? Or the famous stranded on Lakeshore Drive moment from 2011 when people were stranded for 12 hours? It's a long, miserable time, winter is, in Chicago. People start to change emotionally right around March when they've had enough of it. When you clean off your parking spot and put a couch there, and then your neighbor moves your couch and parks there himself, well, that's enough to make a man lose his mind. But you can just put on layers, right? Every time we lose the sun, girl, I turn around and cry. I ask myself, why, oh, why? See, you must understand, the skies, they are not always blue. It'll be gone in November. Of course, we can't talk about Chicago without talking about the crime here. How does Chicago rank in terms of crime? Not good. Sure, a lot of the crime happens in specific pockets, like the South Side, but overall, it's pretty bad here. Per capita, it's not the worst, actually, anymore. While Chicago's murder rate is far from the highest in the nation, it does lead the U.S. in total number of murders. Here's a map which shows where most of the crime happens. That's a lot of dots. Now, a while ago, Chicago finally demolished large urban centers where gangs lived and thrived. Large parts of Chicago Housing Authority's infamous towers like Cabrini Green were razed, which scattered the gang activity. That helped, but the problem here is far from over, as mindless killings make parts of this city inaccessible for just about everyone. Hopefully, crime continues to go down in Chicago. Chicago is not great. If you drove all around, that's what they would say. Drive downstate and ask everyone else. They would tell you that Chicago is a joke. Forbes called Chicago the 4th most miserable city in the country not too long ago, citing many of the things we've talked about or will talk about in this video. Besides the weather and the cost of living and the lack of real progress, Chicagoites aren't the healthiest people. Maybe it's the food? Chicagoans have a pretty bad diet. A lot of deep dish, beer, Italian beef, hot dogs, and brats with or without ketchup. They eat them by the foot here. Or is it the pollution? It's the 18th most polluted city in the country. Or maybe, perhaps, outside of the lake, there really isn't a lot of nature here. Mountains, creeks, pastures. You have to drive pretty far to experience nature. Unless you want this. Sure, diversity is a good thing. Having a lot of culture means you're exposed to a variety of food and music and points of view. But the culture shifts so dramatically here, the city's kind of fractured. All these diverse neighborhoods make the city seem so fragmented. It's a big city, so it's understandable that you can go weeks without bumping into a friendly face. But the cold reality of Chicago is that while people aren't snobs, they certainly aren't Midwest nice either. Diversity could be good, theoretically, except studies have shown that the most diverse cities are also the most segregated. Chicago ranks as the 7th most diverse city in the country, but it's also the most segregated, and it's not even close. Diverse neighborhoods make the whole city seem so fragmented. Of course, Chicago tries to develop a kinship around their sports teams.
43-yard attempt. We'll see if the Eagles want to take that time out.
By the former Eagle.
And, he hits the upright again. That's impossible.
If you move to Chicago, you'll immediately get drawn into the sports culture here. The Cubs are an easy team to love, or the White Sox, I suppose. The Bulls haven't been good since Mike left. Hockey's a big deal here, and the Blackhawks aren't that bad.
The Bears. The Bears.
And of course, the Bears, which define the mood for the entire state each fall. And every year they disappoint right around the holidays, and then Chicagoans look outside and realize they have 3 months of depression ahead of them until baseball season starts again. And then it starts all over. But without sports, there really isn't anything that brings this town together anymore. And more lately, the sports downs are a lot longer than the ups. Chicago used to have good sports teams, but now it's kind of a used to city now. It used to have the world's tallest building. It used to have the world's busiest airport. It used to be a great place to raise a family. If you live in Chicago, admit it. You wish you lived in a warmer place like LA or in a less populated place, even Milwaukee. You're likely overtaxed, overburdened, stressed, and sick of shoveling snow. And if you're thinking about moving to Chicago, well, what for? There are many other places in the country where you can land a good job and be around people who are happier, warmer, and safer. It'll be gone in November, it'll be gone in November. The sun and warm will be gone in November, it'll be gone in November, it'll be gone in November. The sun and warm will be gone in November. January, February, March, April, May. I can't wait till I have her bride day. It'll be gone in November, it'll be gone in November. And give a kiss to your mother. Hey guys, if you learned something new or you just like this video, make sure to like it. And if you really like this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get all of our videos about what it's like to live in different places in America. Peace.